Rivalries. Everyone loves them, and I myself are no different, with my favourite rivalry taking place not in the modern era, but instead it's one that takes place in the Mesozoic, and lasted almost 100 million years. And that would obviously be the Tyrannosauroid and Ceratopsia arms race, which we will be describing in this video, with us going over each and every matchup within this rivalry. These two families were some of the most prominent and impressive of the late Cretaceous, evolving alongside each other all the way since the Jurassic, with one evolving better defense and the other evolving better attack. It's the perfect example of a movable object versus unstoppable force. Although we do know how it ended, and that's with kaiju-sized beasts fighting one another, that's not exactly how it started, and like many things, the beginnings were rather small. Our first stop in this timeline is the late Jurassic of China, around 160 million years ago. At this point in history, the planet's roles of apex carnivores and apex herbivores were already taken up, with Allosaurids and Megalosauroids taking up the carnivore role, and Stegosaurians alongside sauropods taking up the herbivore role. So this means the only role left for our Ceratopsians and Tyrannosauroids was the lesser roles of small game hunter and small prey. And the two which took up these roles were Yinlong and Guanlong, both nothing spectacular if we compare them to their later ancestors, but still, these two were what started it all. At this point though, it was kinda obvious who was winning, since it wasn't really much of a rivalry, and more just a predator-prey relation, with Guanlong being around 3 meters in length and 125 kilos in weight, opposed to its prey Yinlong, which only measured at 10 kilos and 1.2 meters. At this point in Earth's history, Tyrannosauroids were very strange, with the dominant group being Proceratosaurids, which can easily be distinguished by their sagittal crest alongside their 3 fingers, but they did lack the bone-crushing bite force of their later ancestors. As well, the Ceratopsia clade was also in its infantile stages, with them bearing a close resemblance to ornithopods, with them standing bipedally on their hind legs, and their main form of defense wasn't horns, armor, or a bony crest, it was instead just outrunning its predators. Our next stop takes us 126 million years ago to the early Cretaceous of China, with two rivals still being under the dominion of the Allosaurids. Our competitors at this time took it a step down, with them both being around the same size of a small dog, with these two being Liaoceratops measuring at 50 centimeters in length and 2 kilos, and its predator Dilong measuring at 1.4 meters and 6 kilos in weight. Which I will admit doesn't really sound like a huge difference, but you have to remember 2 kilos is 1 Liaoceratops, and with Dilong weighing 6 kilos, this means Lio was up against a foe that weighed 3 times its weight. Moving along to our next timeline, we jump a fair distance, with us reaching 90 million years ago during the late Cretaceous of Uzbekistan. At this point, Tyrannosauroids and Ceratopsians had changed drastically, with both evolving closer to their end goals. The Ceratopsians at this point had begun to develop more defences, with Tyrannoceratops getting their trademark horn and crest, which worked as armour and as a weapon at the same time, since the crest was made from robust bones used to protect the neck from attacks, and the horns worked as a deterrent against biting the face, and also finally gave them a way to properly defend themselves that wasn't just running away, since both of these two horns were the size of daggers, made from thick bone, covered in keratin, and pointed at the tip. So effectively, this made it impossible to take on Tyranno from the front. As well, Tyranno also increased in size, with it now getting to sizes comparable to a small pony, at 2 meters in length and 175 kilos. But just as the Ceratopsians evolved closer to becoming living tanks, the Tyrannosaurs also evolved, with their newest addition Timurlengia adapting various ways to combat its Ceratopsian rival. First, it got a size increase like Tyranno, with it now being 3 to 4 meters in length and around 170 kilos in weight. As well, their jaws were beginning to strengthen, with them now being deadly and capable of dealing life-ending damage in a single bite. Another adaptation in Timurlengia that would become a staple in later Tyrannosaurs was advanced senses, with Timor having excellent eyesight and hearing, which means these two would be our first official rivals, since both parties could efficiently end each other, meaning the fight is a true 50-50. Moving on to our first North American rivals, we find ourselves 90 million years ago in the late Cretaceous of New Mexico, with the two competitors that are Suskityrannus and Zuniceratops, both of which are within the same size bracket of the last rivals, Timor and Turan, and sadly we don't know much about this rivalry, since both sets of fossils are rather bad. So all we do know is they lived together and most likely fought on occasion. Their sizes, behaviour and adaptations are unknown at this moment sadly though, since how on earth are we meant to tell anything from these poor fossils? Next we have a rivalry which is getting us closer to the end goal, with Diabloceratops and Lythronax. Diablo is by far one of the coolest dinosaurs to exist, since it is literally the devil dinosaur. And although its size is kind of a letdown, with it only being around 4.5 meters and 1.5 tons, this isn't exactly a bad thing, and in reality actually helps Diablo. Because of its squat build, this means it was heavily robust, with it likely being able to absorb many serious wounds. Another reason its small size is good is because of its unique head crest, with Diablo having two horns on the very top, which is extremely useful when attacked by larger predators, since it can attack two spots at once. And although these traits are extremely useful for Diablo, it still has one hell of a combatant. Lythronax has an equally edgy name like Diablo, with this guy literally being called the Gore King. Standing at 8 meters in length and weighing 2.5 tons, it does also dwarf Diablo fairly easily. As well, at this point in time, Tyrannosauroids had developed their life-ending bite, with Lythronax having an incredibly robust skull, allowing it to have a bite force of around 5000 psi at the minimum and 6700 psi on the high ends. For comparison, a lion has a bite force of 650, a polar bear has one of 1200, and a great white shark has one at 4000. And the largest modern day crocodiles only have a bite force of around 5k at the maximum, which means the strongest of all crocodiles has the same bite force as the weakest Lythronax. In a fight though, how would this go? Realistically, I'd say it's a 50-50, since Lythro could easily end Diablo with a single well-placed bite, but the problem is Diablo is so close to the ground and heavily defended, it's almost impossible to get a good shot on it. Moving down our list, we now have a very packed point in history, with 6 separate rivalries all happening at the same time, within a span of 3 million years. And first of this is Centrosaurus versus Diabloceratops. Both genuine monsters, with Diabloceratops being one of the largest non-megatheropod tyrannosaurids at 9 meters in length and 3 tons in weight, and then Centrosaurus on the other hand is pretty much just a rhino on steroids, measuring 5.5 meters in length and 2.5 tons. As well, its crest probably had one of the best defences, with it having several small hornlets around the frill and above the eyes, meaning the entire face is off limits. One wrong bite from Diabloceratops and these hornlets are going to pierce deep inside its mouth. So, one-on-one, I think it's pretty clear who's going to be winning this fight, since you can't actually attack the weak spot on Centra. But Diabloceratops had another adaptation up its sleeve, and that was possible pack hunting. Various skull fossils of Diabloceratops have possible face-biting marks. Face-biting is a suspected social behaviour of tyrannosaurs, which, like the name says, involves two individuals biting each other's face while roughhousing. Another thing pushing this idea of pack behaviour is we have 3 separate specimens of various ages all found together, which could possibly show they were maybe travelling together, which could definitely turn the tables, because although Centrosaurus is heavily armoured, it can only focus one foe at a time. Next, we have 3 separate duels, that all happened within the late Cretaceous at exactly 75.5 million years ago. To the south, we have Pentaceratops and Bishiversa in New Mexico. Further east, we have Zuniceratops versus Tetraphonius in Utah, and all the way up north in Alberta, Canada, we have Styracosaurus alongside Gorgosaurus. Onto our herbivores, Nazuto measures in at 4.5 meters and 1.5 tons. Its head shape is also reminiscent of modern day bovine, so its strengths likely would be charging head first. Pentaceratops measures larger at 6 meters in length and 2.5 tons, as well as Nazuto, its head crest is also very strange, with it measuring at 2.3 meters, which makes attacking Penta similar to running into a brick wall, except this wall has 2 scimitar-sized horns. And our last herbivore is Styracosaurus, which is pretty much just a rhino on steroids times 2, since it's the bigger better version of Centrosaurus, at 5.5 meters and 2.7 tons. As well, its main weapon is a 57cm nasal horn, alongside other smaller hornlets around the face, like on the back of the frill to protect the neck, and around the cheeks to protect the face. So although these Ceratopsians do look rather formidable, you gotta remember it's no regular animal hunting them, it's the Tyrannosaurs, and these guys are literally evolved to take down this prey. Starting off, we have the edgelord itself, Tetraphonius, a beast measuring 8 meters in length and 2 tons on the high ends. This dino's name literally means monstrous murderer, and that's for good reason, since the skull of Tetra was proportionally shorter than other tyrannosaurs, which does give it less surface area to deal damage, but when biting it does increase the overall strength, since it can exert more force on a smaller singular point. Next is Bishiversa, and this strange tyrannosaur measured at 9 meters in length and 3.3 tons, which does give it a huge size advantage on Pentaceratops. But as well, Bishi had some pretty major adaptations, with it having 64 teeth opposed to the usual 60 for the family. Its skull was larger proportionally, which would have made it heavier and harder to use, but Bishi counteracted this easily, with it possibly having air sacs above its eyes, which would take weight off the skull. And our last Tyrannosaur, the one matching up against Styracosaurus, is Gorgosaurus, the dread lizard, which puts us in a nice middle ground between Bishi and Terato, with this animal measuring 9 meters in length and 3 tons, which to be fair isn't that much larger than Styraco, and to be honest it is probably one of the most debated rivalries, since Gorgo also lived with Diabloceratops, and it is believed the two may have taken up different niches, so they didn't compete with each other over food. So Gorgo may have actually not hunted Ceratopsians, and instead mainly hunted smaller prey, like theropods and hadrosaurs, while its larger cousin Diabloceratops took down the bulky Ceratopsians and ankylosaurs. As well, Gorgo is rather unique, with it being one of our only tyrannosaurs in the Albertosaurinae family tree, which is a group involving two distinct genus, Gorgosaurus and Albertosaurus, and because of this they adapted very differently to how Tyrannosaurines did, with this subfamily having smaller heads, longer legs proportionally, slimmer builds, and are pretty much confirmed to be scaled, since we do have some mummified scales from one of the genus. On the other hand though, Tyrannosaurians are rather different, with them having bulky builds, large bone-crushing jaws, shorter legs proportionally, and the likelihood of them being feathered at some stages in life is still for debate. Our first and last Asian rivalry in the late Cretaceous is Sinoceratops vs Zhucheng-Tyrannus. Both actual monsters in their own right, but I do kind of feel like this shouldn't count as a rivalry, since Sino is only 5 meters in length and 2.3 tons, and Zhucheng could possibly get up to sizes of 12 meters and 9 tons, which doesn't really feel like a fair matchup, and instead feels like Coughing Baby versus Hydrogen Bomb. Moving along to our last rivalry in this span of 3 million years, we have Nanuctosaurus vs Pachyrhino. Nanuk was a brutal predator, reaching 7 meters in length and 1.9 tons in weight. Although Nanuk is somewhat of a micro-celebrity in the dinosaur community, not much of it is actually known, since the species holotype is remarkably bad, with it being on par with Oxalia. Pachyrhinosaurus on the other hand is rather well known, with this species reaching 5 meters in length, which does make it a lot smaller than its larger Canadian cousin, but still at this size it's nothing to scoff at, with its skull being the most battering ram-like out of any Ceratopsian species, with it having an impact force similar to that of a speeding car. So at the moment, the fight between these two, I definitely say Pachyrhino would win, since we know next to nothing about Nanuk other than just size estimates. And lastly, we have our magnum opus of this rivalry, and this is Tyrannosaurus rex versus Triceratops horridus. Starting with our apex herbivore, Triceratops measured in at 9 meters in length and 10 tons in weight, which means Trike weighs the same as 2 large Indian elephants, and as well as its titanic size, it was also equipped with several other strong adaptations, like thick armoured skin covering its whole body, making it almost impervious to damage, a crest sat on the back of its head like many other Ceratopsians, and this one measured almost a metre in length. It also had 3 horns, one measuring 20 centimeters, and the other 2 could get up to a metre in length. But this size could actually be bigger, since as you may know, the bone of horns isn't their actual size, and in fact they're coated in a layer of keratin, which could possibly add an extra metre onto the horn length. And when you pair that with Trike's surprising agility, Trike becomes almost impossible to attack from the front, since it'll be able to manoeuvre itself so its horns will always be pointed towards the attacker. And as well, the Trike is not unathletic. Although some people still believe that about dinosaurs in general, it was decently fast, getting up to speeds similar to that of hippos and elephants, at 30 to 40 km an hour. And although it probably wasn't able to run for prolonged amounts of time, it didn't need to, since it was basically a bulldozer with 2 lances on the end. And since it does weigh 10 tons and it's moving at 40 km, it's going to decimate anything in front of it like A-Train, so Trike is definitely a formidable dinosaur, but remember it is facing a real monster. Moving on to our other side of the competition, we have the Tyrant Lizard King, Tyrannosaurus rex, measuring at 13.1 meters and 12.2 tons. As well, T-Rex is by far the largest land carnivore to ever exist, since nothing comes anywhere close. And although this size is very impressive, it's probably not the largest it can get to, since every year or so, when we think we found the largest specimen of T-Rex, another kaiju-sized Rex decides to appear. As well as its size, like Triceratops, it also had some crazy adaptations, like binocular vision, excellent senses of smell, the strongest jaws of any terrestrial animal, a robust body capable of taking a large beating, and it had the largest brain relative to size of any non-avian theropod. So you should be able to see this is one insane matchup. Both sides are literally millions of years worth of evolution that was working towards making the perfect species, and I hate to say it since I've said it already, but in a fight, I think it's going to be a 50-50. It's a tale as old as time, the immovable object versus the unstoppable force. So as an overview of this rivalry, this is perfect. It's almost 100 million years of constant fighting, with both sides one-upping each other with each new species. And although the rivalry came to an end because both sides died due to the extinction event, and we weren't ultimately able to see their peak of evolution, but in my opinion this is the perfect ending, with both families being locked in a stalemate for all of eternity, with no one side being classed as the winner.